Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Climate Trends podcast. My name is Aarti Khosla. In today's episode, we are talking to you about COP29, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, which is going to happen 11th November onwards in Baku, Azerbaijan. There are several issues that will shape this year's negotiations, and enough is at stake for the future of our planet. Let's dive into some of them. Ever since the discussions started for the COP29, this has been framed as the finance COP. Important as it is to make discussions real on what climate finance means, this COP has been touted as the one where developed nations, who especially need to step up to provide the financial support, will make the necessary shifts to talk about climate finance. Several analyses have suggested figures of $1 trillion that are needed in the world today to transition to cleaner and less emitting sources. However, there is a lot of devil that lies in the details. Who will pay? How much countries that have the developed status will pay? And what are the kind of sources through which $1 trillion will be gathered? In the end, this has to be a mix of public funds, multilateral funds, as well as a whole lot of private investment that will come into countries to pursue goals around renewable energy, adaptation, loss, and damage. As much as the discussions on climate finance are tricky, they are also very, very crucial, and it's pretty clear that the financial support from the developed countries has kept falling short, leaving many unable to fund essential climate projects. Under the Paris Agreement, the developed nations promised financial targets to be set by 2025, and we are at this year where it's absolutely urgent that we agree on some kind of a common minimum framework on what are the estimates that we are looking at where the developing countries will be supported by the developed countries. There are questions that are here on what is the structure of that financial framework. There are questions around what's the quality of finance. Is that a grant? Is that a loan? Is that private investment? And there are questions on what is the quantum of funds. If we are looking at $1 trillion, do all countries agree on $1 trillion? And what is it that we must stop doing so that we stop delaying and make good on the commitments to not just help vulnerable nations transit to a clean economy, but also put trust in the game when it comes to climate negotiations. As such, the decisions will have to come sooner than later, because even as we speak, we are sitting at a moment in time where climate change has ravaged every part of the world, whether it's the floods in Spain or the wildfires in Canada, or even the way climate impacts have been happening in other parts of the world. It's pretty clear that at no point in the world's history the climate has changed as much as it has changed at this moment. Latest satellite data also shows that we have the last 15 consecutive months where the world has breached 1.5 degrees. That in and of itself shows that we are at a very tough spot if we have to make sure that the 1.5 breach is not a permanent breach, but is a temporary one. And what's needed to make sure that it's a temporary breach is immediate emission reduction that should happen between now and the next couple of years already. Which now brings me to the second important point which this COP has to discuss, which is what are the nationally determined contributions of individual countries and where is scope to enhance those nationally determined contributions, or NDCs as we know them, going forward. Even amidst the US elections and Trump win, a country like Saudi put its NDCs out. There is discussions of China revising its NDCs before the deadline of February next year. And even within the Indian scenario, whilst we've had some ambitious targets of 500 gigawatts by 2030, the question to be asked is, given India's own power demand, our own requirements for increased electricity in cities, increased cooling needs in large parts of India as temperatures rise. Are we in a situation where we can also look at increased renewable targets? Experts give figures of 750 gigawatts by 2030 or 1,000 gigawatts of non fossil fuel installed electricity capacity by 2035. But these are all glorious figures. The reality is that with its NDCs that India put forth almost 10 years ago now, at the moment we have 200 gigawatts of installed renewable capacity. And if we have to hike it very fast, that literally means putting up 50 gigawatts of mainly solar and wind each year. Ambitious as it may be, it will also call for more and faster improvisation on the other side, which means for that much renewables to be in the system, it's really urgent that India also ramps up its battery storage facilities. It's very, very crucial that it increases the grid reliability so that when the country has more and more power demand and there is the peaks that are rising, then the grid is also being able to transmit and wield the power that is needed. And similar for battery storage. At the moment, storage costs are large, but given so much renewables into the system, if we don't have battery storage, which cannot make renewables be firm and take the problem of intermittency, there is no there is no benefit in putting so many renewables, and I think that's a very a tricky catch 22 that India will have to solve. How much faster can it increase its battery storage facilities, and how much quickly can it co-locate batteries where the renewables are, and at the same time how much faster can it modernize its grid, which are important not just for international climate targets but is important as India's own demand increases, the heat increases, and the cooling needs massively increase. And these are things that have to be kept in mind as the country enhances its NDCs. The last point over here is the often contentious matter on how much coal, therefore, India needs when it's looking at its energy transition. And given the situation and given the context of how renewable targets are going to be looked at or revised, it feels that very subtly more than what India is constructing at the moment and the coal capacity that it has, no further coal is required, and India can safely meet its increased power demand from a reliable combination of solar, wind storage, as well as new energy sources like hydrogen, which are being explored in a big way as well. We head into the COP, we are also just emerging from US election results, and sometimes it feels that the COP29 outcomes are being very overly hinged solely on what the US election results and the Trump win means. But on the other hand, it's also true that regardless of the levels of contribution of US into climate finance or what the US internal political situation is, the COPs do have work cut out, and there are tasks and nitty-gritties that need to be addressed when all countries meet once in a year to talk about climate change. And at this COP, there will be discussions that will have to be picked up where they were left last year in Dubai on what are the elements of the global stocktake and how progress will happen within the global stocktake. The NDCs are an important element. Last year, a lot of countries also signed pledges on tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency across the world. What is the status of these progress, and where does that sit? There has been a discussion on loss and damage fund and what constitutes loss and damage even, and therefore what should be the monies that should be set aside. There will have to be a discussion on that. There was an adaptation work program and the pending matters on what progress will constitute in the adaptation work program. And lastly, the contentious aspects of what carbon markets should look like and what are the discussions that have to happen over there. These are all the elements that will eventually form the agenda of what the COP will talk about, regardless of what's happening in US politics at the moment. And that's a wrap from our side on today's episode on what to watch out for at COP29. Stay tuned in. We will be back with more from Ground Zero in Baku, where we hope to bring you some more sneak peeks into what a meaningful climate discussion could look like. Thanks for tuning in to the Climate Trends podcast. Remember, climate change is not a distant issue. It's happening now. Every fraction of a degree matters, and what's decided in Baku will ripple across borders and generations.